Well, welcome everybody. I'm Electra Porzel. I am the director of the Language of Consciousness Institute. And what I want to talk today about is not so much my role there, but what I've inherited from my dad. Well, my dad was a nuclear physicist, and he was he was the national expert on the shockwave of the nuclear bombs. And but that isn't what I remember about him most. What I remember about him most, one is his loving heart, but the other was his utter fascination with new ideas and new discoveries. And in his world, mostly that had to do with physics and science. But it was also his fascination with people. So anytime that he discovered something, he would want to talk to others about it. And as a kid, we kind of tried to avoid that because Dad would really keep going till he thought you really understood it. Now, I'll have to say, I have the same fascination. It's not with science, but it's with what I observe in the world and what I observe within me. And as my father, I like to look for correlations. How are things interconnected? How do they shift in the world by a shift of perception? I think we all know the story of the 5 blind men around an elephant, and each of them could only touch one part of the an elephant, and were sure that it was, a long tube. It was like a tree. And it wasn't. But when we're able to get a number of people together and can look at something from all our different perceptions, we gain a depth of knowing that we didn't have before. And I don't care what that's about, but it's in the interaction with you and me that we gain a perception that we didn't have before. Because each of us sees and experiences the world from very different perspectives. And we also get to give up in that process the idea that what we have experienced is all there is. We know that perception is everything. If I perceive you as friend, I allow differently for you than if I have perceived you as enemy. I make room for you in a way that I wouldn't. And the same is true for just about everything in the world. If we make room for it, if we see it as part of the interconnected whole of which we are a part, then all of a sudden it's not something to fear. It's not something to fight against. It's to be in the flow of with another, with this idea, with this perspective. It has a lot to do with honoring all life and realizing that the world that we live in is a perception, that it's not what is. I've been reading a book recently that I found in one of those, the free library things that people just put a little library out in front of their house and you can borrow a book. Well, I have borrowed a book, and it's really about how the reform movement happened, starting way back in the, I guess 800s, 900s AD, in response to a world that the Roman Church was trying to control people's perception of. And little bit by little bit, this other perception of how what the Bible was like, or how people should be, or of what was not working in the Roman Church gained traction, and people started looking at life differently. They looked at their possibilities differently. And we're in the same thing now. We get to discover that what we thought was how the world worked is not how the world works. We get to decide how we be. We're not our historic patterns, the one we were raised up with, are not ours to be for the rest of our lives. So I may decide that I just want to be happy and get along with others better than I did before. Maybe I decide that I want the core thing of my life to be joy. Maybe I want to give my life for something that brings me joy. So to another, it might be not something that they would understand, but for me, it brings me joy. So there's all these different ways that we can start being in the world, being in our lives. That is not predetermined. That is not us stuck in what we knew before. What we know, okay, let me just back up why this is so cool to me to talk about this. We all are raised from the time we're little kids to do what our parents say to do and be, what our church says, what our government says, what our social group says, right? And for the most part, we want to go along. We said, you guys know more than I do. At least that's what you've been telling me. There are some kids nowadays that doesn't really work for. But for a lot of us who were raised in the last century, that is how we managed to get to adulthood. We got jobs. We were able to take on the cloak of adulthood, but we were still living from the perceptions of our childhood. And I was talking to someone the other day, we were talking about our grandmothers and what the change that they lived through in their lifetimes. My grandmother was born in 1898. So when she was a little girl, they went around in sleighs with horses. Indoor lighting, indoor plumbing, electricity, flying in airplanes, all of that happened in her lifetime. So her concept of what it was to be who she was had to change over time because she wasn't that farm girl anymore. And it's the same for you and me. The way that we knew life when we were young is not how life is now. And it doesn't mean that we have to be yanked by that new way. We can actually decide how I want to be in this new way. I don't have to have it yank me away from my core being, or I can adjust how I want to be in the world with others. When I listen to people talk about what brings them great joy is when they are with others in being welcomed and welcoming. A friend of mine is moving into a new town, across the United States. And what she discovers is in that new town, everybody says, welcome. We're so happy you're here. So happy that you've decided to join our community. And then you get to say, well, look at what that does to me inside of me. How do I still be me and keeping the things that I really value? And also, how do I be different here? Because she's moving to a total different climate, different area, and she gets to listen to the effect of that environment upon her own body. And that's the fascination for me, is being able to be in that conversation with people. Sometimes it's with this friend and what she's observing and how she's experiencing it. And sometimes it's about myself and what I'm experiencing in the community that I now reside in. mostly I like the conversation because it allows me to look at something from all its different sides, to see myself. In some aspects, I see myself very much as a member of a larger matrix. And together, when we write templates together, we write creation exercises together, we are becoming in touch with the larger world that exists outside of the physical world that you and I see. There is so much more than what we have thought is real. There is so much more that operates on our behalf and helps us humans create a world that makes us whole. And that's what I'm after. I'm after the experiencing with myself of being more aware of this matrix of connection with larger forces of the universe, so that I know and experience being supported and extending out. And what I'm fascinated about is not only how this matrix works, how once I acknowledge that it's there, that I can feel it's working with me and supporting me, but I also get to watch, and I also get to watch how it supports others. And that is fascinating to me. So I don't know if that's the first time I've said the word, but I am fascinated about how when we as humans start to experience the larger sense of who we are in the world, and we choose to be differently, to be who more of what we sense we came here to be. Why did we come to this planet in the far corner of the universe? Why did we choose? What are we here for? We're not an isolated being. We are not singular in the sense of a island by itself. That ocean around us is a matrix of energy, of different forces and different powers that are here to help us if we take the time to pay attention. Pay attention to how our greater spirit talks through our body to us, to our conscious mind, to help us be aware of all that can be. We're very limited. We have been very limited in the human world about how we are perceived by others. And we've allowed the other's perception to sometimes determine how we act in the world. There was a phenomenon back in, I guess, the 1800s when there were train accidents. And if somebody was in a train accident, but they weren't physically hurt, but they showed, they had different emotional issues afterwards. We call that PTSD today, but they didn't have that then. And what they decided as a society was they said, well, obviously that person's defective, that we shouldn't hire them. They're not trustworthy. There's all sorts of decisions they made. And the difficulty for those people was they would, if they took that on, that they were defective, that they could not contribute, that they were less than, it ruined their lives. And it's a little bit like our PTSD people today. It's probably the same, in that how the world views you is also determinate in how well you function through something as hard on the system and the spirit and the body as PTSD. I don't have any answers for that, to be really honest. I haven't had it. And I know that it's its own unique story within people. But the more we listen to the story, we more than be with them, the more we get fascinated by all the ways that human beings can be different. I think we have a chance to let everybody find their place. All these kids we have today who I think we call them neurodiversive. Yes, we do. If we start saying, what's the gift that that child brings? Let me be fascinated with how they learn. Let me be fascinated with who their whole being is and help them decide how they want to be in the world. Support them in how they learn. And that's a fascination there. And there are people who've dedicated their lives to saying, let me be fascinated by these children. And when you're fascinated by them, you get to be fascinated by yourself as well. So one of the reasons this all came up for me was, and I said it was that I'm part of creating this program, learning program called Designing Your Life, Artfully Engaging with Your Sentience Through the Templates of the Language of Creation. So the language of creation, those templates, there's 9 of them, are ways that are structures within which you can design how you want to be in the world, what you want to do, what something means to you. And your sentient awareness, your sentience is sentient registers in your system of both the physical system and the etheric that helps your body, that really is aware of stuff on 24/7 that our conscious mind is not, and our spirit that is the one who decided to come here and provide something to this planet and to humanity. They get to talk to you through that. And my experience is not only do I get clear about who I am and what I want to be in the world, but I also am helped to know more of my place within the larger matrix of all that is, versus thinking I'm an isolated person. And I think that's what we've got to help people with. Help them be fascinated about how they're part of a greater whole. Help them be fascinated with see how this world and all that not just how the earth itself talks and works together with us, but how we are part of a greater universe that works with us and helps us. So that's my few words on fascination today, with all that there is. If you get interested in our program, Designing Your Life, you can go to our website, which is www.loc-institute.com, and go to our events page, and you'll see more about that program. It's going to start at the end of the month on the 25th, and it's going to be fascinating to be part of it. Take good care. Thank you.